Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sophia Silao, and I am a program officer at the NYHealth Foundation. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Our topic is climate change and adaptability strategies to protect the health and well-being of older New Yorkers. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. Closed captioning is provided to those who need it, and this session will be recorded. I invite you all to drop your name and your organization in the chat so we know who has joined us for today. Now, hundreds of delegates from all around the world are convening in New York City for UN Week to discuss topics of import to the global community, and climate change and global efforts to reduce carbon emissions to slow down rising temperatures is high on the agenda. Climate change affects everyone. Rural, urban divide, county lines, and national borders do not shield us from extreme weather and the effects of rising global temperatures. And despite denial from some, there is a growing awareness about climate change's connection to extreme weather. We see news reports about devastation, loss of life, and economic disruption, and we feel the effects of these changes in our day-to-day lives. Call for action is mounting, and state and local leaders are exploring adaptive and resiliency measures to mitigate effects of extreme weather on communities. Now, the effects of climate change plays out differently for different people. An individual's ability to adapt to extreme conditions vary depending on social, health, and economic status. Systemic inequities leave low-income, disabled, and marginalized communities at great disadvantage. And the older population is another group that is disproportionately affected by climate hazards. This is significant for New York because it is home to 4.6 million individuals ages 60 and over. The state has the fourth largest older adult population in the nation. By 2040, this age group is expected to make up 22% of the state's population. And so the data alone points to why resiliency strategies geared towards older adults is essential. So I'm pleased to be joined today by Allison Nickerson, Carl Pillemer, Chloe Shores, two community advocates who are working to advance and support systemic change in the aging field. Allison Nickerson is Executive Director of Live On New York, a current grantee of NYHealth Foundation. Prior to Live On, she was Assistant Director of a Geriatric Research Consortium on Pain in Later Life at Weill Cornell Medical College. Now, Allison is busy. She serves on a number of task forces and committees, including U.S. Senator Gillibrand's Aging Work Group, a New York State Master Plan on Aging appointed stakeholder, New York City Mayor's Office Age-Friendly Initiative, the New York City Nonprofit Resiliency Committee, and the New York State Long-Term Care Task Force. Carl Pillemer is Professor of Human Development at Cornell University and Professor of Gerontology and Medicine at Weill Cornell Medicine. His current research projects focus on the connection between the older adult population and climate change, with a special interest in ways of engaging older persons in environmental and climate action. Chloe is the Associate Director of the Cornell Initiative for Research on Climate and Aging. Her current work centers on building knowledge and partnerships to strengthen climate resilience among older adults, with a focus on community-engaged research. Welcome, welcome. So I'd like to start with you, Carl. If I can ask you, since your research is very deep in this topic, I'd like for you to help ground our discussion about the issue of climate change and its impact on older New Yorkers.
But thanks so much, and it's really it's an honor to be here, and we are so grateful for the foundation's support of this work. And yes, I'm going to make the case, I think, for why this is so important. And I have to say, I think it is important to do that because I give many talks about this to professionals in the field of aging, people in the environmental field, to researchers. And very often when I talk about this link between climate change and the older population, people frequently say, gosh, I never made that connection. I never thought of that. And that's one of the issues that we're really trying to sort of overcome in this project, because I'd like to share they are really intimately connected. And let's see if the gods of technology will have this work. Somebody give me a thumbs up that you're seeing my slides. All set? Okay. So, why aging and climate change? Why consider it this way? Well, a glib answer is because basically everything is about climate change, or will be. That as much as it's like staring at the sun and we don't like to think about it, this really is our reality, the reality of future generations, but in particular right now, it's the reality for older people. And let's see if I can get that to advance. So in addition to being bad in general, it's especially bad for older people. And I would argue, and I think we would, that at present, they are the most at risk and vulnerable population. So if we're concerned about protecting frail or vulnerable old people in particular, we have to think about the effects of climate change. So they have an overall vulnerability to environmental threats in general. As people age, when I was a younger person and a gerontologist, I would say I could say we. Our bodies are less able to compensate for the effects of environmental hazards. We don't clear chemicals as well, and we don't detoxify as easily. And because of disease or because of use of pharmaceuticals, older people often have impaired immune suppression, which can be affected by these kinds of environmental effects. Most dramatic are the effects of heat events on older people. Older individuals are exponentially more at risk. Older people's bodies are less efficient at temperature regulation. And we know from endless studies that extreme heat increases risk of illness. It increases doctor visits, hospitalization, et cetera. Another obvious issue, which I'll come back to in a moment, is how much more vulnerable older people are in disasters than any other part of the population. It has an especially severe impact on people with disability because they can't evacuate as easily, and people with dementia. There's a profound impact on people's caregivers who are trying, both paid and family, who are trying to provide help in the absence, say, of power or water or food. They have a devastating effect sometimes on long-term care systems. The issues of displacement and evacuation are enormous for older people. And of course, unhoused individuals are also at substantial risk. So just to give you an idea of the result, and this is kind of our motivating sort of part of this presentation, and this is with those of you who might not have thought about this, let me give a few examples of how older people are more vulnerable. So people age 75 and older were around 6% of the New Orleans population, and they accounted for over half of all the deaths in Hurricane Katrina. In the 2018 wildfire, and we'll see what it was recently, 71 of the 84 people who died were age 60 and over. In our own Hurricane Sandy, half of the deaths were people age 65 and older, even though they make up a much smaller proportion of the population. Texas unexpectedly had a period of extreme cold, and older people were 60% of the 246 deaths. There was an awful heat wave in Europe in which people age 75 and older accounted for more than half the deaths. And so why are they so vulnerable? Well, some of it is what I said, is that older people in these events either can't evacuate or they're institutionalized and they're unable to be moved. But there are also some structural factors because, and we're going to come back to this, I think, extreme weather events can disrupt all kinds of things for vulnerable older people. Their ability to get their medication, their medical appointments. A key issue is what do you do if the power goes out for several days and you're dependent on oxygen or on refrigeration for medications? And clearly your home health provider may not be able to get to you. So that's an important reason. Also, older people and their caregivers, as a result of disasters in particular, can add to the financial burden of caregiving or of being cared for with increased medical expenses, home repairs, need for home modifications, and the expense of emergency preparedness. And one thing that we're also exploring is evacuations of disasters, extreme heat events, cause trauma and stress for the general population, but sometimes especially so for older people. The thing I want to add, so we did want to start with that kind of information because we wanted to give a sense of the urgency of this. When we talk about climate change, often we talk about the importance of saving the earth for future generations, but for older people, that future is really now. They are canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. But not just that, they are being profoundly affected all over the world, disproportionately by climate change events. But we do want to say it's not just older people as victims. A lot of our efforts, our work with Live On, and with other groups, is to think of older people as part of the problem. How do we mobilize them? The disabilities movement gave us a great phrase, nothing about us without us. So we need to include older people in climate planning, in climate plans, and have them be active participants, both in preventing and responding to climate change. And the last thing I will say is that just to make you aware of, and we really welcome people's interests, our role in this is through a new initiative called the Cornell Initiative for Research in Climate on Aging. And the goal is to unite academic researchers and policymakers and people in health and social services to build knowledge, so to understand how we can mobilize older people, how we can protect them and have them help to protect themselves, to try to create community connections, as in our work with Live On, which Allison will talk about, and to inspire positive and propositive action. So developing media, tools, other kinds of programs to support older adults and caregivers and advocates to become engaged. And I think the other thing that ties it all together to end is we really believe in a translational research model where research doesn't stay in the ivory tower, but it comes out and gets used by the organizations who are represented today, and hopefully some of you who are listening. And I'll just end. These are some items that we offer on our website. There are databases of articles or grants and funding opportunity, guides, videos, emergency preparedness tools. And because Chloe works with me and knows how to do QR codes, that's why you have them, in addition to web addresses. They'll have access to the slides. Maybe I'll leave that up just for 1 second if people want to. And I think, all righty, I'll stop sharing. Oh, no, sorry, we're going to come back to that later.
Thank you so much, Carl. And you
Thank
teed
you
it
all
up.
for listening.
Thank you. You teed it up perfectly, Carl. I wanted to ask Allison to talk a little bit about Live On. We are current grantee of the Health Foundation for your climate resiliency project. Give us a little bit of context. Who is Live On, and why is climate resiliency an area of focus for your network?
Sure,
I'm
thank you.
going to apologize. In the Murphy's Law Department, there's a very loud noise going on outside here, so I'm going to go try to intervene. I'll be right back.
No problem.
Good. Thank you so much, Sophia. So Live On New York is a not-for-profit organization that was founded in 1979 with the purpose of being a coalition of providers who will advocate and push for a better place to age here in New York. And so our goals are really twofold: to make sure that the government provides an atmosphere where people can meet basic needs and that they can thrive in later life. And the second is that the community-based service system has the tools that it needs to make sure it can reach people who need support. And so this project, I'm so thankful. We are so thankful and so thrilled to be able to be a grantee partner of the New York Health Foundation, which is allowing us to re-enter a partnership with Cornell. We have worked with Cornell and Weill Cornell for over 20 years with a focus on community-based research, or what I like to call real-world research, that really brings what's happening in the field, policymakers, advocates, practitioners together to come up with policy-based solutions that can be quick and kind of shovel-ready, if you will. And so the core purpose of this work is to make sure that New York has the policies and social infrastructure in place to ensure that the effects of climate change are mitigated, including respect to health, and that older people are not excluded from decision-making. So this work is really grounded in two fundamental things. Number one, environmental justice. I want to acknowledge that for far too many communities, this is nothing new. New York State has a very strong history of both environmental neglect and outright abuse of communities, particularly communities of color, poor communities, rural communities, Native communities. And so everything from like the work in Niagara, which spurred the, all the work for the, I'm totally blanking, the Superfund sites, right? Here in New York City, I'm based in Midtown right now. There is a long history of environmental injustice. And for many people in communities that have felt that for far too long, it is not a surprise that older people are most affected, and their work, their activism, and litigation has been what has driven change. So I want to acknowledge that we are really steeped in understanding environmental justice and how this interacts with the work we're doing. The second is community. So we know that in order to make long-term impacts, we need a community of people to be working on this. We need policymakers, advocates, older New Yorkers, caregivers, government colleagues, foundation partners to be focused on this work in order for it to be truly sustainable. And we also know that community means that we need a default that we can age in our community, right? Our default should not be over medicalization. It should be community living. That is what people want. It is more cost effective. And in a climate that is changing, older people need access to cooling, affording basic necessities, basic utilities, to be safe from flooding and those kinds of things. So I just want to say a few more things, and I'll turn it back over to you, Sophia. In terms of the long-term impacts, we have like 4 major things that we're working on. The first is ultimately the health and well-being of New Yorkers, right? We all wake up one day older. I am 40. I want my children and my parents and everyone in my community to be able to look towards a later life that is one of health and well-being. The second is that as we age, we can be assured that policies are including us and that we are mitigating environmental stressors. The third is that older New Yorkers know how to raise their voice around this issue and that they can say what is most concerning to them. And we're so thrilled to work with Cornell and listen through focus groups all over the state to hear what older people are looking for and what they most need. And then specifically solutions to change policy, because New York City and New York State and federal policy are currently leaving older people out of their existing climate change plans. And this is extremely important because we are looking at a new mayoral administration, a gubernatorial race, and a federal system that continues to change every moment I refresh my New York Times app. So, there's a lot going on. This is also so critical now because the lessons that we're learning here in New York can be applied throughout the US. Live On and 20 other states have been meeting as state coalitions. And so we are learning what's happening in other places and able to tell our learnings to other states. And so really understanding what works best here has implications throughout the country. So we're really thrilled about that.
Thank you so much, Allison. Before we move on to Chloe, I wanted to make sure we loop Carl back in to talk about how the New York Climate and Aging Action, or NY-CAAN, is working towards climate resilience for older New Yorkers.
Chloe, is that me or is that Chloe? I think Chloe, are you?
No, I think that one's you. To talk a little bit about the consensus workshop and kind of our partnership
Okay,
on the
got it.
research
Sorry.
policy practice end of
Sorry, I
things.
was a little behind the times. Yeah, so we are we have a number of related activities. So one has really been doing some mapping, and we're going to be doing this more completely in the coming year of trying to understand everyone who is interested and involved in this particular issue, directly or tangentially. So sort of a mapping of who are the possible allies for this kind of work, and what, sort of how we can approach them and how we can involve policymakers, academics, and other folks together, hopefully having more events. And a signature event that we conducted that involved a number of people from all of these sectors was a conference, and we're going to be disseminating the information from that conference in a report. And if folks are interested and we can get their names and emails, we can certainly send it out to anybody who's interested. And it's something called a research to practice consensus workshop, where direct service providers, policymakers, and researchers all came together for a day to create an action-oriented research agenda. So one of our biggest goals is not to publish or do pure research that's of interest only to members of a subfield of a subfield of an academic subfield. The idea is to understand what research priorities resonate with people who are on the ground helping older people. So what does somebody who's running a cooling center or who's in a home health agency who has to try to access people during a heat wave, what do they feel that they would really need to know? And then they interact with researchers, and together they hammer out a research agenda. And so my cliffhanger is we actually have this research agenda and are going to be publishing it. And the idea is to continue to try to seek funding for projects now that reflect this consensus research agenda. So, over and over and over, everybody talks about evidence-based practice. But what we are focusing on is practice-based evidence. So where the impetus for studies, even though we use regular scientific methods, they come from our community partners. So we really hope with the help of folks like the foundation to be able to create this kind of a vigorous, vibrant research partnership. And the final thing I say, I know that we'll come back to it, but that we really are interested in working together, to understand how can we get older people themselves more interested and involved than they already are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll definitely talk about that in a minute. But Chloe, it's your turn. I know that you lead the New York Climate and Aging Action's community engagement work, right? And so I wanted to ask you, why is engagement with older adults so important? Is there anything in your recent work that resonates with this conversation that we're having today?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll begin by just echoing what Carl grounded us with at the beginning of this session, the nothing about us without us. So the principle that no decisions about a group should be made without that group's input. And Carl just mentioned the valuable work that we do bringing together researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And that's really wonderful. But if we don't hear directly from older adults themselves, we're really missing the heart of the story. So, what are the lived experiences? What are older adults' priorities? And in general, just hearing their voices is essential to understanding the problems that we're facing with climate and aging and shaping solutions that actually work. So, in an effort to really hear these voices, we've been conducting a focus group study with an aim to build a baseline understanding of how older New Yorkers perceive and experience changing weather patterns and extreme weather. So, what do they know? Are they worried? If they're worried, what are they worried about? How prepared do they feel? What resources are they aware of? And, like Allison mentioned earlier, what do they think that government or their community agencies should be doing to support them and to help keep older people safe during extreme weather events? So the questions that we developed for this study, we went about it very intentionally. We first started by working with a community advisory committee, which was pulled from Live On's membership of aging service providers. And so they helped us to ground the questions in reality of what they're seeing. And then we revised those questions with researchers and with medical practitioners to make sure we were capturing the health and social dimensions of climate and aging. So we conducted 11 focus groups in New York City. I talked with over 100 older adults across all boroughs, and we specifically chose locations that were in environmental justice areas through EJ NYC. So these were at older adult centers, and we're still analyzing the data, but some themes have already come out pretty clearly. So the first being that older adults are aware of changing weather and extreme weather, and they're concerned about it. They talked about hotter summers, stronger storms, and a growing number of large disasters happening across the country. So there's awareness that this is happening and concern. Second, they recognize their own vulnerabilities. Older New Yorkers mentioned physical impairments, mobility limitations, inaccessible housing, and the risks of living alone. One person saying, if something happened to me, no one would know. And I think that really captures the physical and social dimensions of risk in these situations. Third, there's a big gap between concern and preparation. So people know they're vulnerable, but they don't feel prepared. And awareness of services in New York is pretty limited. One example is that we held a focus group at a senior center that doubles as a cooling center. But when we asked about, what services would be available to you during a heat wave, many of the participants in that group didn't know that their senior center was a cooling center. And finally, older adults had concrete ideas about what they would like to see from government to help. They talked a lot about clear and trusted communication before, during, and after events to make sure that, they're not left guessing in a crisis. They talked about education and information that's specifically tailored to older adults. Systems for checking on homebound or socially isolated people, and investments in accessible housing and age-friendly infrastructure. And those are just a few. There's a lot that came out. So that's New York City, but we also know that this picture looks different outside of the city. So we've been conducting parallel focus groups across New York State to assess these differential vulnerabilities. So far, we've completed 7, covering the Finger Lakes, Central New York, Southern Tier, North Country, and the Mohawk Valley regions. And we have 4 regions still left to do. We completed those ones just a few weeks ago. So we're still in the middle of analyzing those results. But a few contrasts and key points are already, top of mind. So, bringing it back to the comparison of, in a city environment, in the city, someone, mentioned, I could be trapped on the 16th floor during a power outage. But in a rural area, the challenge might be driving 10, 20, 30 miles to reach healthcare, or during a storm when roads are out, being completely isolated and stuck. At the same time, a lot of people in rural areas that we spoke to described feeling less reliant on formal services, many describing that they had generators and food stockpiles. So that was something else that came out. But again, we're very early in analyzing these findings, and I still have more left to do. So we're looking forward to comparing those perspectives and looking into the perspectives of New York State further. Um, Another thing we asked about was climate change itself, and across nearly every group, both in city and New York State, older adults said did believe in climate change, and that's supported by national surveys that suggest that the vast majority of Americans do believe in climate change, but where views differ is perhaps on what's causing climate change or whether anything can be done. So some people were skeptical about human activity being the cause, or a bit resigned, there's nothing we can do about it. But what was striking is even those who may have been skeptical or hesitant to talk about climate change still wanted to talk about pollution, air quality, and other environmental issues. So that door is still kind of open, even if there's a different framing. And just to circle back to your original question, just about, the importance of talking with older adults and that engagement. I'd just like to point back to, what we're really finding here is this paradox that older adults are concerned and they're aware of the risks, but they don't feel fully prepared. So that's kind of where our work lies, is to bridge that gap. So ourselves with Live On, that's kind of what we're seeking to do, is to turn this awareness into action and make sure that older adults have the tools and the supports and the confidence that they need to face, all of these challenges that are coming with our changing climate.
It's so fascinating, Chloe, and I'm really looking forward to reading more about the results of all of the other focus groups that you're conducting. Very powerful perspectives. And obviously, we know that those most affected by the issues, their perspective and their input is so invaluable in shaping accountable, actionable, and sustained solutions. So thank you for that work, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it. Allison, I wanted to ask you a question. So we know that New York State, New York City, they've both dedicated resources to mitigate the impact of extreme weather on their citizens. New York State, for example, has the Home Energy Assistance Program, or HEAP, as we like to call it, where eligible households may receive one cooling unit in response to increasingly hot summers. There's also the Department of Environmental Conservation's Climate Smart Communities Grant Program, which allows municipalities to receive funding to do things like retrofitting critical infrastructure to reduce flood risk and reduce emissions from food waste, for example. But these are all steps in the right direction, right? Is there anything that's sort of missing from the older adults' perspective that you wanted to share?
So I think, Sophia, fundamentally, it is moving in the right direction, and serious work is happening across the city and across the state and across all the counties that make up New York State. I do not believe that there are people in a room planning how to exclude older folks. Like I believe that everyone is doing the best that they can, and that they are thinking about the future of New York citizens. However, I want to give kind of a crass example. If it was 1980s, if it was the late 80s, and we were looking at HIV/AIDS statistics and not understanding who was dying, we would be missing the picture of who is most vulnerable. So when we look at who is dying from heat, for example, and we know that older people are far and above the folks who are feeling the effects of heat and passing away, and yet we don't have an overlay of age to look at where we should concentrate resources, we are missing the boat. And that deeply impacts all of us, right? Like we all have a future that is aging, and this state is aging. So that is something that has to change. So I want to give a few examples on the ground of what this looks like. And I want to also give a shout out. I saw folks were saying hi in the chat. There's so many of our member agencies who are the ones who are like in this and doing that work. So I really thank them for day in and day out, all the work that they do. So on the ground, this looks like the state's only air conditioning program is for everyone under 60, not for everyone. It is for people who are eligible, but you cannot be over 65, right? That's a problem. The HEAP program runs out earlier and earlier every single year. And for people who often do things or don't always have internet at their fingertips, those applications are difficult. And so we put people at a disadvantage. We also have no major home modification for people, for older New Yorkers in rural areas, suburban areas, or urban areas with resources that allow people to do basic upgrades or become energy neutral. That doesn't exist. We don't have that. Our heat maps, again, like I just said, do not overlay age. We don't look at age as a major factor and say, oh my God, there's these 10 blocks, these 10 areas that are most vulnerable. That doesn't happen. We have nonprofit systems or agencies that are tasked with being cooling centers that have antiquated HVACs that don't work, that do not have handicap accessibility. We have an entire, and we're very lucky, we have a phenomenal aging community-based service system that is not being used or resourced to allow people to even best know that it's a cooling center or know where to go. We have maps up on emergencies that are outdated. And so all of this leaves an entire swath of our community out. And so those are just some of the things on the ground of like what that looks like. Even though we're making strides, if we do not intentionally include people, we end up leaving those who are most vulnerable behind. And that is not acceptable in this state.
And then there's also the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is tied to anticipated funding cuts on state budgets. So Allison, love to hear your perspective on that.
Sure. I could go on about this for 45 minutes, but I'll be brief. So we are living, as you and all the people on this webinar know, we are living in a time of intense transition, policy change, paired with a scarcity mindset. And that is happening within extreme and dangerous rhetoric. So we are very closely at Levon monitoring the federal funds and how they impact the New York City budget, New York State budget, and then what that's going to do across the state. You know, we had heard there were rumors that the legislature was going to come back in the summer. That did not happen. And we know that the state has I think as of a few weeks ago, a $3.7 billion shortfall. There's a lot of changes to Medicaid that will put people at real risk. And so, you know, when looking at these issues, first, I think we need to not have a scarcity mindset. New York State and New York City's budget is enormous. We have enough money to do things that take care of our citizens. So I think we really need to be critical about that. And the work of this project is to make sure that older adults and all of us as we age, right, are included in the work that's happening. We need to connect dots. This isn't like a huge money grab at the state level. This is about making sure that the resources that do exist can be tied to people in need and community resources that already exist. So we need to really look at what is possible. And we need to also push our federal folks. We have people across the state. We have 2 extremely powerful senators in the state. We have, you know, Congress members who matter across the state. And so making sure that they know about this work is really, really important. I also want to say that, like, while this is a policy initiative, there's so much work that can be done. And I see this in our member agencies all the time and the incredible work that they do. You know, this is a human issue. And yet we don't really talk about it like that. We don't check on our older neighbors. Not a lot of people realize that, as Carl was pointing out, as we get older, our bodies don't regulate temperature the same. So even though we might be being dehydrated and might be getting hotter in the summer, you often see older people, if they have minor cognitive impairment, in lots of layers of clothes. That should be a symbol, right? To say, like, something's not right here. Or if you have a neighbor or a relative or an aunt and you know, someone comes to bring them some, you know, zucchini bread, as my neighbors used to in Bay Ridge. If someone is overheated or doesn't have heat, we have to start thinking about this. The reality is that there's only one place on this planet that is not rapidly aging. One. The rest of the world has an aging population. So we have to decide policy-wise and culturally how we are going to adjust. And so some of this is also making sure that as humans, in our programs, in our community, in our families, that we also know and can plan and can understand what resources are there so that we can adapt together to what is now a reality. I think I talked for more than a few minutes. I'm sorry.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect, Allison. And I just want to drill down a little bit more. And so just in terms of what Live On has in the works, what can we...
Or Sophia, I think you paused out.
Oops, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I was gonna just ask you I wanted to drill down a little bit more and hear more about what Live On has planned in the coming months.
Sure. So we're really excited. Together with Chloe and Carl, we've combined forces to do a ton of information gathering and working with older people. Over the next year and in the coming months, we have 5 main things that we are focused on. The first is policy recommendations. So we like to know what we're not good at. And one of the things is gathering and doing all sorts of qualitative data, which is why we're so thrilled to have this partnership. And so taking the policy or the data and understanding how that pairs with policy recommendations is going to be so critical for our ability to make change and put forward those recommendations. So that's one. The second is to continue building a broad coalition of people to connect these dots. And so we have an Age Strong New York City and New York State campaign. This is going to be brought right into that. And so we would encourage anyone who wants to get more information, I'll put my information in the chat, to contact us about how they can get involved. The third is political power mapping. At Live On, we have a few different models of change that we like to look at, but one is that there are people in power who are big decision makers. And so understanding where that is and who are the best places to lean into to catalyze change is a big one. So knowing that, especially in this environment of city, state, and federal governments elections that are looming is very important. The fourth is advocacy tools, grassroots mobilization, and press outreach. We develop tools for advocacy campaigns a lot. And so making sure that we have tools related to this work will be really, really important. And the fifth is that we are going to hold a climate summit. You know, we got into this work really because we heard from so many of our member agencies that they were so concerned about this and that they were very involved in Sandy, very involved in COVID, and now there's a huge threat and no one is including them, and older adults seem to be off the map. So bringing people together for a summit and really moving the needle and continuing to advocate is tantamount. So those are the 5 things that people can expect to hear from us over the next several months.
Yeah, a lot of exciting projects in the hopper for you guys, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it as they roll out. Carl, just wanted to ask you, you know, we've spoken a lot about older adult vulnerability today, right? And a large amount of your work in your career and Live On's work as well has focused on older adult engagement, mobilization, and a reframing of aging. How do you see older adults as part of the solution?
Thanks. That's a great question. I also, by the way, I see some folks from Cornell Cooperative Extension as participants. Just a welcome to you. And if you're interested, feel free to get in touch with us. And Sophia, I just want to say also to agree with Allison, because I think it's a segue into what I'm about to talk about. You know, this idea that we can't do anything because national politics are so disrupted. I think the one thing that we found on this issue, dealing with climate change and preparing the older population for climate change, isn't an issue of the current 3 or 4 years. It's a long-term problem that has to be dealt with a long-term mentality. So we can't just drop everything like this because we're panicking. So I think the one thing that Live On, what Allison said, is exactly, we can't have the mindset that everything's ending, everything's scarce. On an issue like this, we have to keep moving forward. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Allison because I entirely agree. So there are a couple of interesting things about older people's engagement. We know that older people volunteer for all kinds of things, and they do so in very large numbers. However, relatively few of that large number dedicate themselves to volunteer work involving the environment or climate change. There is a wonderful, group of individuals throughout the country who do, but so one of the issues is why, because involvement in issues like climate change and environmental action is really a natural fit for what, developmental psychologists consider to be the tasks of aging. One is it's a great way to express generativity, which is something that people in my age and older really feel the need for, and that's that they want to contribute to a world that they themselves may not live to see. And clearly trying to protect the environment and reduce the threat of climate change for future generations is a great thing for them to be involved in. There are some difficulties, and this is what we're really going to work on, I think, in the coming couple of years. Older people see some barriers to engagement. One, there are some who feel that they don't know enough about the issue or that they need more advanced scientific knowledge. One is that, one more is that when people retire, They often want to replace lost social relationships. And a lot of the activities offered to people, older and younger, are things like stream cleanups, water testing, trail cleanups, which aren't especially social. So we're developing programs that try to overcome these things, group projects, group involvement of older people, and helping people to learn in non-technical and non-threatening ways what they need to know. So there's massive possibilities in other countries. Organized groups of older people have had incredible success. And we're seeing in the US groups like Elders Climate Action and Third Act, which people may know about. But I think we need to develop easier pipelines, more engagement. And in some ways, I think we hope to use New York City as, and the state as kind of a living laboratory to understand how we can up the engagement of older people. And just, I know I'm going on long too, but I'll say, I think we came to a major discovery in these focus groups that you may not be able to engage, let's say, rural older people and some people in the cities in climate change itself, but they're extremely concerned at what they're seeing. Many of them can refer to a specific location where they fished, where they hunted, trees they loved, and they're seeing the changes. So I think there are all kinds of entry points. And as we study more with the projects you have helped us to do with the grant, I think that we're going to really understand how do we get old people, into this movement. So I think it's a real bright light. I think older people can really be an untapped resource, and we're trying to see how to tap it.
And Allison or Chloe, did you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I would add, I think the activism, I think that people, when how do I say this being totally bipartisan? So, a lot of the activism that's happening now, if you go to, Indivisible, No Kings rallies, when you look at people who are participating, it is older Americans. It is older people. And so, I think there is a kind of belief that stodgy older people are the climate change deniers, and that we've seen a real shift. And I think the visualization has shown what we've always seen, which is older people, first of all, are a reflection of all of us. We're all aging, but also that there are a lot of people who want to make a change and feel very, very strongly about it and are very interested in getting involved and want to know, like, what does this mean for future people who are aging, for caregivers, for their children, for their grandchildren, their neighbors. And so I think that is that's really exciting for all of us. It's exciting because we can see our own activism, right? Like, as we age, we don't just fall off a cliff when we reach a certain age. There's possibilities, and people are excited to spend their time doing very meaningful things.
Absolutely.
It's not my turn, but can I add one tiny thing?
Please do, Carl.
Well, the one thing you do, if you do focus groups with older people in New York City, you realize that we're in a global environment. So many of them have relatives in other countries. And I will just say, climate change is going to be an enormous problem globally, because we know that when there's climate change migration or migration in general, it's very typically older people who are left behind. So, we sensed anxiety from people who we interviewed about their relatives elsewhere. And that's a very real concern too. So I know we're thinking locally, but the impact on older people, like in the global South, for example, is going to be even disproportionately greater as those areas are affected. So I think you're right, Allison. It's true. You do see a lot of older people at these rallies, et cetera.
Now, we're coming up to time, and I wanted to invite the audience if there are any pressing questions that you wanted to pose to the panel here. We'd love to entertain them. Feel free to drop it in the chat. And while we're waiting for you to do so, I wanted to, sort of invite Allison and Carl, Chloe, if there are any particular sort of words of wisdom for the audience about what they can do to support climate resiliency for older adults. I know you've shared a lot of different strategies, but from your own experience, from the work that you're doing, is there anything that you want people to walk away with?
Chloe, I was wondering, I know you've been involved in our social media function where some of those posts have really, kind of tried to convey older people's wisdom, kind of. Is there anything, that you sort of gleaned from that work in terms of?
Yeah, I think that, yes, please, a shameless plug, please follow us on Instagram. I think it's at Cornell Climate Aging. I think something that's really great is like the intergenerational aspect of older adult volunteerism and activism, because I think there's so much wisdom to be shared. And I think on these social media platforms as well, seeing what older adults are doing for the climate, is really inspiring for me to see, for my peers to see. So I think that's really wonderful. And I think also, we have like older adult volunteer spotlights, which are really great, but we've also done interviews with older adult volunteers themselves. And I think watching those and listening to those and hearing, how people stay hopeful, how they continue to engage with this work, even when it can, be a little bit disheartening sometimes, but how to continue pushing through is something that younger generations really need to hear. And Carl, I know that we have that video of Jay, and I wondered if this might be a good time to play that.
Yes, I think that we can do that, but I wanted to insert something in here. We did have a question that came in, if I may ask. Do you have any templates for grassroots powered solutions? Someone's organization works with block associations to create open streets during the summer, and these neighborhood gathering spaces are perfect solutions for at the block level.
Yes, absolutely. So Leslie, I would love to connect. I'll have to scroll up to see, and if you could send me your email address, I will reach out for sure. I think when you were saying like any words of things, I was thinking like there's nothing that happens by chance, right? Like in this state, in a place where there's a lot of political power and a lot of political money, things happen because certain people are pushing or embarrassed, or it's a pain, right? Like we have to advocate for what we want. And so thinking about how community organizations can work together. I mean, all of this is like the crux of what makes New York City and New York State tick. If I could say one more thing, I just think like New York is not like other places, right? There is a substantial amount of community activism that is in New York compared to other cities in this country. And so it is our job to continue to carry this torch, right? Everyone, because the political scene will change, the people in power will change, but ultimately communities we have to decide for ourselves what kind of future we want and really fight. I don't know, I think that's probably obvious, but I would be happy to connect templates and grassroots power solutions with you, Leslie. So I will thank you for your email.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the same thing. That's just a terrific suggestion. That is so helpful, because we have been thinking more about educational and motivational materials on the individual level, but that is a great idea for, sort of ultra locally, say for block or neighborhood associations, that they have materials, ideas of what they can do. I think that sounds like a great sort of agenda item for our work together, and I really appreciate that suggestion.
Absolutely. So I wanted to go back to Chloe's suggestion for us to show a video of someone who's been involved in climate justice for a while now, right? So wanted to give you the space for that.
Yeah, and let me just say a brief sort of preamble is we've been doing interviews for a research project, the very detailed interviews, now with about 60 older climate activists, and are trying to understand their motivations. And we have been doing videos. So with some of them, Chloe, I think on YouTube, we maybe have a few more. and they are really inspirational. And Jay is someone who you're going to see his video, became very involved in this a little bit later in life. And I think it is a very good example. So we asked him the question, why should older people get involved in this? Okay, so make a frightened waving if no one's hearing the sound. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what I'm going to do? People told me this was a little faint, so I'm going to turn my own volume up. Okay, here we go. Let's see if it works.
Well, I don't have any children, but I have nieces and nephews and grandnieces, and I have friends with children. And as a man who loves life and loves, I know I'm coming in short order to the end of my life, but I'd like to see the human experiment continue. I think, but we are severely constrained by the ecological ravaging of the planet. So if you have children, think about your children and their children and the future. I think that's a powerful motivation. But also, if you have derived, as I have, a sense of deep satisfaction, a sense of love. I have a romance with nature. I really love the natural world. And I'd like to know that it can continue for future generations. That inspires me to do the work that I do and to keep informed and, active.
So that is, we are trying to tap, I think, that kind of practical wisdom in, all of these projects and have it grounded in that.
Yeah, I'm so thankful that you showed that video, Carl. It's a great way for us to close out our discussion. It's such a hopeful and wise sort of perspective from Jay. Some of my takeaways from this conversation is the importance of centering public health and perspectives of older adults in climate mitigation strategies, and also the need to really focus on equity issues and access gaps, right? So I wanted to thank you, Allison Nickerson, Chloe Shores, Carl Pillemer, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and sharing information about all of your timely and very important work. And then I also wanted to thank our Crackerjack communications team, Erica Von Boxtel, Shannon McCall, for their work behind the scenes. And also I wanted to do a very quick plug for folks to keep an eye out for an upcoming webinar on older adults and food insecurity that we are going to sponsor in the next couple of weeks. Local advocates and national experts will discuss the findings of a statewide research that we commissioned to understand the experiences of older adults on accessing food. So we hope that you can join us. And with that, I am going to sign off and wish you all a very good day. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.